Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Rakowski household. And again, I want to thank you for my wife for filming this. So we are studying vibrations and waves, and what you have learned about so far by watching a couple videos are the basics of waves. You've seen the crest, you've seen the trough, you've seen the compression waves, which are the ones that kind of squish together like this, like a slinky. She talked about transverse waves, which are the up and down waves. She talked about wavelengths. She also mentioned frequency, and that's kind of what I would like to talk about today, because I'm going to relate it to a phenomenon we call the Doppler Effect. Okay? So first thing I want to do is I just want to go over the waves again one more time, just to kind of make sure you understand what I'm talking about and how frequency relates to wavelength and how that all relates to the Doppler Effect. Okay? So I'm going to come a little bit forward here, and I have this already drawn out. And I show you the transverse waves on top. Now, if you recall, again, the transverse wave has an up and down type motion, like an ocean wave. A typical ocean wave would be a transverse wave. Light travels in the same way. So what you have is you have a crest, which is the top of the wave. You have another crest over here, which is the top of the next wave. And in between, you have a trough. The way you actually measure waves is you go from crest to crest, okay? Or you can even go from trough to trough, but it's typically measured crest to crest. You don't go halfway because that's half the wave. So you don't go from crest to trough. Now, this would be considered a longer wavelength because it goes from here to here. And I mentioned, so this is LF, low frequency, and longer wavelengths. Here I have what's considered a higher frequency wave because they're shorter wavelengths. And you can see this goes from crest to crest, and the next crest is right here. So these wavelengths are shorter than these wavelengths. So pretty much in a nutshell, if you have a longer wavelength, you have a low frequency wave. If you have a shorter wavelength, you have a high frequency wave. Okay? Now, this is what light would look like. This is what an ocean wave looks like. Now, sound is a compression wave or a longitudinal wave. So typically you think of them when you think of slinky. So if I hit the end of a slinky, it would compress in one area and it would spread out and then it would compress. This area is called the compression. This is why they're commonly called compression waves. This area is called the rarefaction, but what it means, it's not compressed, it's simply spread apart. And this area is the compression. So from compression to compression is how you'd measure a longitudinal or a compression wave. Now, sound waves or longitudinal waves are commonly drawn like this. You may have seen them in some type of advertisement that shows music or somebody singing, and you see these lines moving away from the person. And so this would represent a low frequency or a longer wavelength because you could see there's more space in between. The lines themselves would represent the compressions. The space in between would represent the rarefaction. So you can see there's more space compared to the one below it, which would be a higher frequency sound wave, okay? And so you have shorter wavelengths because there's less space in between. Now, let's go back to the big board, folks. I had mentioned Doppler effect. Doppler effect is a phenomenon that happens in science based on frequency and wavelength and how it approaches any observer like yourself, okay? So the best definition that I have ever seen is this one: an apparent shift in wavelength from an observer's point of view. It's a phenomenon. It's not really happening, but it seems like it's happening. That's where you get the word apparent from, okay? And from wherever I'm standing is what's going on. So what does this really mean? As a wave appears to compress or get closer together, okay? So, let me rephrase that. A wave appears to compress, okay? It gets closer as it's approaching an object. So if I'm talking to you and I'm moving towards you, my sound waves are compressing against your body, okay? And in terms of sound, what that does, it makes the pitch a little bit higher, okay? Now, when the wave leaves the observer or goes past it, then the sound sounds lower pitched. It doesn't change, it just sounds that way. So it's an apparent shift in wavelength from the point of view. So nothing has really changed, it sounds like that. And just for you people, I have two examples that we're going to use, and we're gonna go the first one right now. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm in another part of my house right now. And many of you know I'm a harmonica player. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play the same basically riff over and over again. I'm not gonna change the pitch or the tone or anything that I change about it. I'm simply going to be moving towards the camera. So as I move towards the camera and then past the camera, I want you to listen carefully. It won't be a dramatic change, but there'll be enough of a change where you will actually hear it becoming a higher pitch. Because if you just picture the waves coming off my harmonica as I play, as I approach my wife and the camera, they're going to compress and they're going to sound like they're higher pitched because the wavelengths will become shorter. And so again, it creates a higher pitched sound. So here we go. Hopefully this works. Ready? Here we go. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that first example, ladies and gentlemen. And now for the second example, we're going to go on location somewhere in Hemet, and away we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in the Burkowski household. I hope you enjoyed both examples now. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my buddy Glenn for actually helping out and driving the rat rod and help us out with that example. It was nice too. The reason why it was great to use that car too, guys, because the engine was on the outside, and a lot of cars nowadays, it's so quiet, it would be kind of difficult for us to actually hear that. So I do appreciate my buddy and give a shout out to him. Thank you very much for that. So let me go over a couple examples that we just went through, guys. So we first basically, you had myself playing harmonica, so I'm going to actually move to the other side of the board here, guys. And you had myself playing harmonica, and my lovely wife was actually filming. That's her with the red hair right there. So basically, as I was moving towards her, and again, I was not playing anything different. I did not change the pitch or the holes or anything. I played the same riff. Basically, you went from low frequency waves to high frequency waves because the waves were actually compressing, or at least they apparently were compressing, as they were approaching the camera itself. Now, when it left the camera, or past the camera, I should say, the waves were spreading back out, so you went from high frequency back down to lower frequency again. So the wavelength plays a role in the frequency, and the frequency plays a role in the pitch, and that's how Doppler effect is really, or what's happening in Doppler effect is this apparent change in this wavelength. So the second example, I have my buddy drive now. I wish I could actually draw a rat rod, but that's pretty much the best car you're ever going to get me to draw, and I'm actually pretty impressed with it. So if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but I think it's pretty good. Now, as this car was actually moving towards myself, who was filming at the time, the wavelengths started out again with low frequency because it was further away, and again he kept the same speed as he drove by me. It was about 40 miles per hour, maybe a little less than 40 miles per hour, about 30 or so, because we were in a neighborhood. But again, you could see how the waves were compressing as they approached the camera, and then as they left the camera, they were decompressing. Now, a couple other ways that the Doppler effect has been used in modern society. Well, the most common way, obviously, is the Doppler effect with weather, where they use that to actually track weather patterns based on the compression and the separation of the air molecules and things of that nature. It's also been used to map the galaxy, or excuse me, the universe, to determine that things are moving away from a central point, and kind of supporting a theory called the Big Bang Theory with red shift and blue shift, basically, and that's how light waves work, but that using the same concept of Doppler effect. So it is used in a common place, and again, it's the apparent shift in wavelength, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is wavelength frequency and how it all relates to the Doppler effect, which is a pretty neat science phenomenon. You have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.